Hey everybody, it's David Levitt with Amudi Ministries, and thanks for joining us here this evening. We have a very special guest, and he is on with us. We have Mike Hersch with us, and um, I guess it was however long ago this war started in Israel. I uh,
hmm
I said I got a guy, I got somebody that I know that I really want to bring on, on a YouTube live or do something, ask questions to because of his knowledge about the land and his history with the land and his experience with the land and not just scripturally, but he's actually lived there for some time. And so we finally have him on, and it's Mike Hersch, and he's been on quite an adventure for the past month, and I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about that. But Mike, thanks for coming on this evening. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so I've known,
hmm
how long have we known each other, Mike? We've known each other like 2005-ish,
I think so.
18 years, and
You can say
we would go
18 years.
years without talking and things, kind of acquaintances, but
hmm
we've become pretty good
hmm
friends. And Mike is a great, great brother. I've appreciated his wisdom. Well, let me talk to you, Mike. I'm talking to them, but I have appreciated your
Yeah,
wisdom.
yeah.
And Mike's been a great
hmm
encouragement to me in many ways, just again as a brother, and yeah, highly, highly value our friendship. So, again, thanks for being here with me. Mike
hmm
has lived in the land of Israel
hmm
for 30 years, so that's quite some time. And actually, I'll let you tell the story, but it was almost, well, a little more than 50 years ago when you first visited. So the land's
hmm
kind of in you. And he's also just released a new book. I'll just go ahead and plug this for you. A new book
hmm
called The Isaiah Code. All right, well, let me
hmm
put it this way: The Isaiah Code, Unlocking the Message of Transformation. And there should be a link down below if you would like to pick that up. I've not finished it, Mike, but I've read about half of it, and
hmm
really enjoyed it. And I don't know if you'll
hmm
refer to it tonight or not, but um, I'll tell you the thing that's come across to me so far is leadership is very important, and
hmm
who the leaders are of a given nation or organization have a lot to do with how the people are doing, and that may be appropriate to talk about tonight or not. But anyway, I
hmm
wanted to let you share
hmm
your testimony first off of
Sure.
how you came to the land. I think it'd be good for those that are listening to get a feel
hmm
for how God drew you to the land, what it means to you, even how
hmm
you came to know the Lord. Mike is a Jewish believer in Jesus, and
hmm
so yeah, why don't you have at it?
Well, okay. Thanks, David, for all your comments. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you always, and your honesty, your humility, your desire for the word. We share that, not the honesty and humility, but the desire for the word.
I think we share both. I
So
do.
it's a little levity, but anyway, the we have David and I have a common mentor, and I just want to talk about the book for a second. In Henry Wright,
Yes.
Henry, and I tell everybody this that in 2004, 2003, my wife Angela and I connected with Being Health Ministries. I had no idea or no knowledge of being health. I was in the States to go to a school, and friends introduced us to Henry's teachings and the ministry, and Angela got healed of something. It was amazing. So, long story short, became connected. We interned with Being Health. That's where you and I met,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Cassie and Angela.
Mm-hmm.
But Henry's teachings changed me, changed my life. And
Mine too.
up, I think everybody that comes through, and for the most part, for the good. But um, I would say that before I went through Being Health, and became familiar with the teachings, and I even got set free of things. I got delivered of some things.
Mm-hmm.
All my teaching was on Israel and its relationship to the church and how God's working through Israel. And I tell everybody that before that, It was like I was on a three-legged chair. That once the deliverance aspect came in and our connection from Genesis chapter 3, to an opposing authority,
Mm-hmm.
an alien authority, that if we don't know that, if we don't understand that, we fail in our discernment. And I think Henry taught that so well. And everything that I put in this book, I wanted to get. Henry passed away a couple of years ago, and I just published it this year. I really wanted to run it by Henry. I told him, before I published it, and I give him a lot of credit with what I wrote, because a lot of it has to do with communication, and it starts with the teaching. Basic teaching of being health is which kingdom are you listening to, in the
Right.
spirit, mind, body connection. So if I'm listening to bitterness, well, that's not God.
Right.
So until you really get discipled, and you can discern your own thoughts, you begin to discern your own thoughts. We're in need. I think we're not um, we're not being properly discipled, and nobody ever discipled me that way.
Mm-hmm.
In 30 some odd years before that, nobody ever taught me that.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am in my 50s, and I'm learning things that I never had heard. Well, let me say this: I had heard it, but it was kind of like a fringe teaching. It
Okay.
wasn't
Yeah.
something. It wasn't something that took root in my life, because I didn't get it in depth understanding. So if you go to a Being Health seminar, uh, they say it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
But that fire hose is like a defragmenting your hard drive, and you don't even realize what's going on.
Yeah.
So everything I say in this book has to do with communication. It has to do with Israel listening and obeying. I guess everybody on knows Deuteronomy 28,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts off by saying, "If you listen and obey, I will raise you up. You will be the head and not the tail. If you don't listen and obey," verse 15, "all these curses will come on you." And in modern teaching, church teaching, you hear many say that theologians, that was for Israel back in those days, in that first
Mm-hmm.
covenant. It's not for us. I beg to differ. And if you read what I have to write, and everything I've learned, I'd say it's very much for us today.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
So, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I would
how
totally
much we
agree.
learned.
Being the
Mm-hmm.
ways of God are the ways of God, and
Yeah.
when He worked with Israel and works with Israel, like you said, it's the principles of the kingdom of
Right.
God, and
Mm-hmm.
that transcends. That is what it is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and His
Mm-hmm.
ways are going to be the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the
Mm-hmm.
effects that Israel would feel from disobedience or obedience be the same effects that anybody would feel from disobedience or obedience. So
That's
absolutely,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah. It is an absolute.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally
And
agree. Now, Mike,
mhm,
I'm going to tell you right now, my setup's not great. I know it looks like I'm looking down and not at you, but
mhm,
this is how I'm looking at
mhm.
you. I'm looking on the screen. My camera's up here, so don't
Yeah,
mind me
yeah.
doing this, okay? But I'm
You're
I'm
fine.
locked in with you, okay?
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
I'm good.
so
I'm
share a
good.
little bit about
Hmm.
because one of the like when I sent out the email today that we're going to be talking to you, I kind of titled it
Hmm.
beneath the headlines, okay? And um,
Yeah.
okay, we know where media is; it's kind of all over the place today. Uh,
Hmm.
COVID kind of drove me to a point where I didn't really trust much information
Hmm.
unless I knew somebody in the quote industry, medical community, that also had shared similar beliefs with me, and I
Hmm.
had some experience with and knew that they were a trustworthy person. And it was like only those
Hmm.
people I would listen
Hmm.
to, and I would talk to them by phone calls or things like that to try to
Right.
understand what was going on. And so these days, anytime something like this happens, I know I don't have a source in every area, but I've always thought of you as that when it came to
Mm.
Israel. There's headlines, and I'm not saying
Hmm.
those are all not true. Okay, I'm sure some of it is true, but
Yeah.
you've been watching this for a while. All right, now
Hmm.
I'm actually getting ahead of us here, but I want to say this. You've been watching what's been going on in
Hmm.
Israel for a while with your own two eyes, not through
Hmm.
headlines, through
Right.
your daily communications with people, through the
Hmm.
people you interact with at the store, um,
Hmm.
things like that. And you're a Jewish believer in Israel, which gives you, I think, a very unique perspective that even most Israelis would not have because they don't have the Spirit of God and understanding things from a prophetic standpoint like that. So I'm just really
Hmm.
excited to have you on here. And for those that are watching, that's why we've brought Mike on, is to give us that aspect of what's going on with this war and how it started. But Mike, tell us how you got to the land. What Tell us your story about how you and Angela moved to Israel. How did God lead you in that way?
Okay. Well, just to begin with, um, everybody knows that on October 7th last month, the war with Hamas started. It was a surprise attack, caught the IDF flat footed. All the advanced intelligence failed, the security systems failed, and Hamas was able to slip 3,000 fighters across the border, one of the most heavily guarded borders in the world, I'd say. Electronically, physically, soldiers, and they managed to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody I knew was in shock. I mean, it was just, how did that happen? How could that happen? And then people didn't even know who to blame it on, or how to blame it, or how to tag this thing. So I would say that it's a good analogy for us as believers. Number one, that you think your enemy is held at bay, everything's good, but the enemy is always looking for ways to get in.
Mm-hmm.
He's sharp. He's of course, he's a rebel, and he's fixed his eternity through his rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
but he knows how to get in. This was my daughter. Our daughter was in surveillance in the army. That means that she was 4 hours on and 4 hours off, just looking at a high density screen all day at cameras that were into Tulkarm. Tulkarm is an Arab city, um, right about 8 miles from the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay.
So the West Bank bulges into mainland Israel. So here's this narrow strip with Tulkarm right on the other side, and they have security cameras in there all the time. And depending on those security cameras, if something would go wrong, my daughter would call up the IDF. They'd have this communication line open all the time. She would say there was suspicious activity, and they would send a unit out right away. So with a system like that, and that's only part of the system, how did it fail? This is a big question.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, let me integrate my testimony into that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so October 7th was this attack on Sukkot.
Mm-hmm.
On October 6, 1973, was a surprise attack on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. I was 23 years old. It was October of 1973. In April of 1973, I was a believer. God had started to speak to me about going to Israel, and I had no desire to go. My life was planned out. I was going to buy this land. I was going to build on it. Long story short, I just had all my ducks in a row.
Yeah. Of course.
Okay, so God's telling me for months to go to Israel, and I'm denying it for months. So finally, the war breaks out, and I knew it sunk into my spirit like, you need to get over there. So it's a long story. The short end of it is on October 20th, 1973. I was on a plane. I was one of 175 out of 15,000 volunteers. 175 were chosen.
Okay.
They told me that I didn't fit the profile, that I had quit my job. They said, well, you might as well go on a vacation because we're not going to take you. And then the next day they called me up and I was gone on Friday. That was a Monday. Tuesday they called me up. Friday I was in here. Got there. There was 6 days left in the war. I was up north on a kibbutz near the Lebanese border. We watched the war from a distance. Myself and some others on the kibbutz talked about, how we would get involved. We could see ourselves involved militarily,
Hmm.
but that never happened because Israel won the war miraculously, in my opinion, and I think many agree.
Yeah.
To get caught that flat-footed and come back and take Syrian and Egyptian armies and overcome them, tremendous. Went home after 6 months in March of 1974.
So you stayed in Israel for 6 months.
Stayed in Israel for six
Okay.
months. That was the length of my ticket. My
Okay.
ticket was up in 6 months, so I went back. Never got it out of my system. Cried when I got back. Like, what am I doing here? I belong over there. So I was indelibly imprinted on my heart, that you are supposed to be there. And just one thing that God did to really sink that into my heart, was in 70, probably a year, maybe a year and a little bit more before the war. I was driving a truck on Madison Avenue in New York City, rush hour. Had my Bible next to me on the seat, and all of a sudden a picture pops up on my windshield. And it's like a hologram. It's like I can almost touch it and feel it. And I see hills and mountain or trees and fields. And I said, God, what is that? Why are you showing me that? What is that? Well, went down. But then when I went to Israel, I got off the plane, had to pick a place where we would go. Each of the 175 people, they had a big map at the end of the room. They took us into this room in Tel Aviv, government office. They thanked us for coming, and then they said, we're going to take the place of a soldier who's on the front line doing his job. And there's all these colored pins on the map, so pick a pin, choose a pin. So I walked up to one of the guys. I said, I don't know anything about the country. So he looked at me and he said, the north is green and the south is desert. So I said, I'm going to go to the north.
Yeah.
So I went and I picked a pin off of the map, got on a bus, drove up north. On the way up, I'm looking at fields and just Israel,
Hmm.
Israeli culture, life on the road. And the only way I can describe it is, if you were an amputee and all of a sudden your amputated limb grew back, that's what I felt in my guts. I
Mm.
mean, it was. I started to cry on the bus. I had my head in my hands. I just wept on the bus. Got to the kibbutz, said goodbye to everybody. The bus driver said, "Go to that building and report there." So got off, waved to everybody, looked around, had my bags in my hands, started walking toward the building, dropped my bags, turned around, fell to my knees, and just my hand just shot up in the air.
Mm.
Praise God, because I'm looking at the scene that was on my windshield.
Hmm. Wow.
So I say this, that in Isaiah 43 and 44, God says of Israel, He says, you are my witnesses. That's who we are. That's who the Jewish people are. We're the witnesses that say God is real, that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, He is real.
Hmm.
That Isaiah 46:10, He says, I am God and I tell the end from the beginning. So I am a witness to that. My life, my being in Israel, is a witness and a testimony to the fact that God is real, and he took me to a place I didn't want to go to, showed me it before I went there, and then has taught me how he's taken the Jewish people, sent them out of the land for disobedience. If you don't listen and obey,
Mm-hmm.
after all these, Deuteronomy 30, verse 1, after all these blessings come upon you and all these curses, and I cast you out around the nations, and you cry out to me, I will bring you back. He's 100%. God is faithful to his word. He's faithful to the Jewish people. He's faithful to what Joel chapter 3 says, his land and his people. So here I am 50 years later, again in a surprise attack, almost to the day.
Mm-hmm.
This time, I'm not the 23-year-old, combatant who's going to
Yep.
jump out of a helicopter with a K-bar knife in his teeth, and attack the enemy. I'm an old guy. I'm a 73-year-old guy who's not going to be good on the front line. And I'm only going to say this. I had tremendous family considerations to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have stayed? Probably, yeah. I'd probably still be there.
Yeah.
There was on the 7th, on October 7th, I woke up at 6:30 in the morning, and in every house in Israel we have what's called trisim. It's these blinds that come down on the outside in a track, and it closes tight shut so you don't get any light in. So I'm in my bedroom, 6:30. It's dark, and I hear what I thought was thunder. Distant thunder.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, it was cloudy the night before. It rained a bit before that, so we probably have a storm coming through. So laid there for a minute, and so got up. I wasn't going to go back to sleep. Opened up the blinds, and it's a sunny day. So I thought, I know what that sound is.
Mm-hmm.
So I checked my phone because we have an app called Red Alert. And Red Alert will give you you'll get a pop up on your phone uh, that'll tell you if there's a rocket attack,
Mm-hmm.
if there's an incursion by terrorists. It'll tell you anytime. So I looked at it, was loaded with them. I mean, it was just one after another, but 20, 30 of them right away at
And
6:30
what
in the
what day
morning.
was that on, Mike? That was on the
It was on a Shabbat. It was on a Saturday morning,
it was on
6:30 in the morning.
set, and that was the 7th October.
No, it was the eighth day.
That was okay.
The eighth day is Shemini Atzeret. Shemini Atzeret means the eighth day.
Of assembly.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Holy Assembly. And there's a reason for that, and I've written that up, and I'm sending it out with my update. But why Yom Kippur and why Shemini Atzeret? If you if you think it's just Hamas, I don't think so. And there's nothing I dislike about the Arabs. Arab people are good people. I've worked with them. I was a contractor for many years. Friends of ours, good friends of ours, are Arab, Arab Christian and Arab Muslim, and they're not bad people. I don't have a problem with the Arab people. I have a problem with the spirit behind Islam.
Sure. Well,
So
let
yeah.
me. So you said something. This is not just Hamas, and then just what you said. Um,
Hmm.
the spirit behind Islam. It's not their people. It's a belief system that does have a
Hmm.
spiritual dynamic to it. Absolutely. Um,
Right.
talk about, because I do remember having a conversation with you about a month and a half, maybe,
Hmm.
before the war broke.
Hmm.
Um, and you were already kind of indicating that things were not usual. Okay, like
Right.
it just, there was tension that you hadn't experienced. I mean, there's always tension in Israel. That was kind of a given, but
Yeah.
it was a different level. There was a different kind of tension. There was a different tension between the Israelis and the Arabs. And yes, this caught the IDF by surprise, and it was a surprise attack. But in some ways it didn't seem like it was all that big of a surprise. It felt like something was building up. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that and what you see are some of the spiritual dynamics that was building those tensions to where we are right now? It could be political, but also the spiritual dynamics behind the politics of it.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, it's a slippery slope in Israel because you're dealing with two completely different cultures and two um, religions in opposition to one another. As far as the Arabs are concerned, well, let me deal with it this. Let me get into it this way. Before, when I spoke to you, what I saw happening started to really tense up in 2021. And that was there was a war between Hamas and the IDF in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
We called it, Israel called it the Guardians of the Walls, and Hamas called it the Sword of Al-Aqsa or something like that. And it started because of a desecration to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, for those that don't know, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on Temple Mount. So when you come to Jerusalem, you'll see that the Temple Mount that King Herod built. He started it back in 20 something BC, finished it in 40, I think. And it's still there, but it doesn't, the temple is no longer on it. Now the Al Aqsa Mosque and the Mosque of Omar are on it. It's also Mount Moriah, where traditionally, biblically, Abraham took Isaac to be sacrificed.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very significant um, piece of real estate.
Right.
So that war started over a desecration. I forget exactly what it was, but Hamas said, if you do that again, we're going to attack. And they did. They
Mm-hmm.
attacked. And where um, I lived in a Muslim village at the time,
Oh, wow.
just outside of Jerusalem. But they're friendly. Some of them serve. One of the guys from the village served with my oldest son in the army. So there's a brotherhood there, but there's a tension.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the war started in 2011 or 2021, sorry, immediately after, riots broke out all over the country between Arabs and Jews. There was a new level of tension that hadn't been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And it all had to do with Al-Aqsa Mosque, with the faith, and with the fact that we're second, as an Arab would see himself as a second or third class citizen. So you could see it, you could feel it. Before the elections, before the Netanyahu government came in, I was in a store in this village, and the elections were the next day. And here's this young Arab, probably a Muslim, and he's saying to me, Yesh Atid, Yesh Atid, like, hey, let's vote for Yesh Atid. Yesh Atid is there's a future. That's what it means.
Okay.
It was Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz. That's their party.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they said, one of their platforms was, the ultra-Orthodox will not be in this party. We won't deal with them. Which the Netanyahu government, when they came in, they brought in the ultra-Orthodox. So you
Right.
see a couple of guys, I don't know how familiar people here are with what's going on, but Itamar Ben-Gvir is from Jewish Power Party. Okay, he became, because they helped, and this is the way the Israeli system works, the parliamentary system,
Yeah.
on coalitions. So you get elected, but then you have time to get a coalition together. There's 120 seats in the Knesset. There's 120 seats because there was 120 members of the Sanhedrin, back in the
Way
first
back
century,
when. Hmm.
right? So whoever has the majority, if you have 61 members in your coalition, you're good. So in order for him to get in, he had to have the ultra orthodox with him.
Gotcha.
So a couple of the parties, the Jewish Power Party, for one, of Ben Gvir, is anti-Arab. I mean, they are. I would have to say it's almost criminal. Not almost criminal. It's criminally racist the way they speak about the Arabs. If anybody knows who Meir Kahane was, he was a rabbi from New York who went to Israel, and he's preaching his kick all the Arabs out, kill them, get them out of here. He was shot and killed by some Arab terrorists, for his rhetoric, back in the 90s. But they're still espousing it.
Hmm.
So Ben Gvir gets in. You could feel the change. I could feel it.
You just feel it, yeah. Wow.
And then you see he becomes the head of national security for whatever reason. It just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. I'm not a lefty. I'm not a righty. You
No, no,
know, just trying to make sense of it all.
no, that's why I like having
But
you on. You're impartial. It's just there. It is what it is, you know.
it is what it is. Yeah, you have to. Some people don't agree with that, but some people do. I think that you could see it in people's eyes. You could see it in people's eyes in the village that we lived in the stores, with the people that that I've been dealing with in restaurants. And, we had kind of a camaraderie. Everything died. It was the same thing, interestingly, in 2020 with COVID. You could feel things change with COVID. I don't
Right.
know about you guys here, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, you
almost like
definitely could.
right?
Yeah, you definitely could.
Okay, so that's what I saw. I saw a marked change within the spirit of the average man on the street, and especially the Arabs, and especially with what the riots that went on. Jews and Arabs are calling each other out. They're fighting on the street. They call it lynching in Israel. The guy got lynched. Doesn't mean he was killed.
Mm,
It means he was attacked by a group of, if he's a Jew, by the Arabs, or if he's an Arab, by the Jews, and it's happening both ways. Okay, so we're losing the fabric that held us together in society.
gotcha.
And why? In my humble opinion, I would say it's because of what the Netanyahu government brought in, and not that the left with an LGBTQ platform is good for the country,
Right.
but what drove the moderate Muslim who just wants to make a living and doesn't care if he lives on the Israel side of the border or the Palestine side of the border, that kind of rhetoric drives him toward the radical.
So the let's, can we talk about the Temple Mount for a little bit? Because
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
even the thrust of what Hamas is saying in this attack, um, that's a primary piece of this as well. Like you said, it's a very valuable piece of real estate. I mean, what does
Uh-huh.
that represent a little bit more for Judaism? What does it represent for Islam? And do you think that that right there is just a big driver of this? Because like you said, it's a spirit behind uh, Islam, and if
Mhm.
you would get into that a little bit more, obviously one of the main beliefs of Islam is that Ishmael was the promised seed and not Isaac. And so
Mhm.
it's almost as if Israel is stealing this inheritance from the true inheritor, and then they kind of have this long-standing
Mhm.
brotherly rivalry kind of going on. But what does that look like? I mean, is that something that people talk about amongst each other? Do you see it manifesting in other ways? What was that kind of like? I mean, over the
Hmm.
years, and then coming full circle to this moment here.
It's kind of excuse me. It's kind of under the radar.
Okay.
It's something people don't talk about so much. And until I looked into it, excuse me, until I looked into it, I didn't really have an idea of what it was. But now that I understand it, it's the driving force. It is the Genesis 22 is the Abraham taking Isaac to Mount Moriah.
Mm-hmm.
And God tells Abraham that Isaac is his firstborn son. Listen, don't worry about Ishmael. Isaac is your firstborn son. He's your seed. Now, what Islam has done is they twisted it. They've said that Genesis 17, God gives Ishmael this promise. You're going to be the head of 12 nations. These princes are going to come from you. And they reason because they reason from this foundation that the Quran is the final revelation,
Mm-hmm.
that the new covenant and the old covenant are subject to the Quran. So what the Quran has to say, or what the hadiths, their commentaries have to say, is more important, and it takes the place of the Bible or oral law or anything else. So they say that, yeah, absolutely, it's not Isaac, it's Ishmael. They celebrate it, you know. They have a holiday, Eid al-Adha. It's at the end of Ramadan. Actually, it's when Hamas attacked in 2011 on Eid al-Adha.
Oh, wow.
And it celebrates Abraham's faithfulness and Isaac or Ishmael's deliverance. So it's huge for them. And then, according to Islam, if Allah gives a land to Islam, if they conquer a land, if they take a land,
Mm-hmm.
well, then it's always theirs. Dar al-Salam
I see.
versus Dar al-Harb. Yeah, that this belongs to them. Nobody can take it away from them. So now you have two things. You have one of the most holiest sites
Mm-hmm.
of Islam not in the hands of the Jews. That's not true. The Temple Mount is in the hands of the Waqf. It's the Muslim authority over the Temple Mount. The Jews cannot go there to pray. They're not allowed. So, but because the land is part of the deal, I
Right.
mean, the covenant with Abraham was for the land,
Yeah. Right.
right? So the Jews can't have it. So when you look at what Hamas has to say, if you read the Hamas charter, if you read the PLO charter, they're saying that we will get back this land. They quote Quranic verses.
Wow. I didn't know
Hmm.
about that law. Again, if you can, let me make sure I heard
Hmm.
this right. There's a law. I forgot what you called it, but
Yeah.
in Islamic teaching, that once they've conquered a land, it's always
Hmm.
theirs. So
Right.
that's like a whole nother. Not only do they believe it was their inheritance through Ishmael, but also this has been conquered at some point, in history, and
Hmm.
so therefore, no matter who was there before, who's after, they consider it theirs.
Right.
Yeah. So
And then,
so
yeah, it's a huge thing. But then look at the way they view the Jews. From the beginning, they've called the Jews sons of monkeys and pigs.
mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about Islam and you're talking about the relationship between Islam, Judaism, and the land of Israel, it's not just Arab. It's not a border dispute. It's not like Uruguay and Paraguay are having a dispute about a border. It's a very deeply rooted spiritual issue. And I think that the attack this year on Shemini Atzeret came because powers and principalities were in the plan making.
Sure.
It didn't just come from the Hamas heads.
Yeah, no, I totally 100% agree
Mhm,
with that. One
mhm,
of the things I've been trying to communicate in teaching is in spiritual warfare, whether it be personally or you have something like this at a
mhm,
global political level, is that there's two kingdoms in one. There's one war, and the war is
mhm,
over something very simple. It's over truth.
mhm,
What is true? And obviously, here we've got two sides of the story with Islam believing a um, a fabricated kind of twisting of the record of Abraham, going to sacrifice his son, and then we
mhm,
have the truth. We know of Isaac was actually the one, and so it's still Satan as the father of lies. He's going to lie. He's going to twist truth and bend it in
mhm,
a certain way, and then look at what we get. It's not just that it impacts us in a personal way. We have our personal battles, with lies and
mhm,
with truth, but here we see how it affects the whole,
mhm,
political sphere, the global sphere, really.
mhm.
So, what are you thinking this war represents in prophecy? One of the things that honestly it bothers me a little bit. But
Yeah.
everybody's so quick just to say anytime it seems like any war breaks out, it's Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Mm.
You and I have talked a little bit about Psalm 83 and just kind of bouncing that around. Um,
Mhm,
but do you see this war as more of like maybe just another step in the aligning of nations? Is it a dividing line in the nations as to whether or not they're going to stand with Israel or not? Um, is
mhm,
this war is God allowing this war not just because of disobedience, on Israel's part, as we've talked about, but is it to draw the Jewish people back to Yeshua, Jesus, to look for a Messiah? That things would get so bad they're going to look for a Messiah.
mhm,
So what are your thoughts on this? And if you have any scriptures or anything you like to go to,
mhm.
we'd love to hear that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, I'd have to say that my understanding of the prophetic is kind of like storm clouds. We were at a wedding in the Italian Alps a couple of years ago. It was amazing. If you've never been to the Italian Alps, it's incredible. But somebody took a time lapse video of the. We were like I forget how many thousands of feet above sea level in the mountains. But in the morning, the clouds would form down below you, and then they'd come up this valley, you know, all the way up the valley. And but the time lapse video was great to watch because you're watching things change, right?
Hmm.
So when you're looking at it live, just as it's appearing, you kind of see it as a one unit just moving up the mountain, and it's almost like you can tell the next move. When you see it on a time lapse, you're like, wow, that thing changed so many times. I see the same thing with prophecy. It's like 3 years ago, I saw the prophetic this way. The Turks were aligning with or let's go back to Saddam Hussein.
Hmm.
Saddam Hussein, the Syrians were training together for an attack on the Golan Heights. I remember going into an inspection station, and I asked an older Israeli. I said, "What do you think about this?" Because Saddam Hussein was threatening to wipe out the north of Israel. And he said, "This is life. It's always been like this. This is life." Big smile on his face. So you kind of get the mindset of somebody who's grown up in Israel, in the Middle East, with this constant uh, whirling of the storm clouds.
Hmm.
But I don't think you can take anything as solid. Let's say it's kind of fluid. But I do see this, that we're going to end up in Zechariah 12 through 14. We will end up there. This is one thing I see consistent with end time prophecies in the Old Testament. God's going to bring back, let's say, Jeremiah 30. Jeremiah, write this down in a book. I'm going to restore Israel and Judah. So that means Israel and Judah have to be out of the land.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to bring them back. So we know Israel was out in 700, something like that, 700 BC, and Judah in 136 was gone. So now I have something that I could say that's definitely fitting in after 136.
Mm-hmm.
That can't happen until after 136. But then he talks about the time of Jacob's trouble. You know, they're going to come back, I'm going to bring them back, and they're going to have the land again, and it's going to be theirs. But then why is everybody walking around with their hands, men with their hands on their stomach like a woman in labor? This is the time of Jacob's trouble, but I will save them out of it. So he's telling us that I'm bringing you back. You're gonna have the land again. It's going to be really hard. You're going to be in the tightest spot. You know, you're going to be in tremendous fear and distress, just like Jacob was in Genesis 32. But I'm going to save you out of it. So what did he do in Genesis 32? The angels came, two camps, and then he wrestles with an angel because he doesn't want to go. And the angel kicks him in the hip so he can't run away. But then he sends him off to accomplish this through him, through Jacob. Jacob has to accomplish it through his presence. He has to reconcile with his brother. And he does, and God's behind it. Okay, so now we're brought back to the land. I see the picture on my windshield. I end up on a kibbutz where I see the reality of it. Okay, now I have to work that out in the flesh. That means any attacks that come, you know, any hardships I have to go through, God's going to be with me. He'll save me out of it. So I think every single prophetic end time prophecy starts with the gathering of the state of Israel, the attack from the outside, and then God saving us out of it. How he's going to save us out of it, and you know, what's the context of that? Zechariah is rough. Zechariah, it appears rough. Like 2/3 of the nation can perish. Jerusalem will be taken. That's a hard one for me to reconcile. But I recognize it as being part of this tapestry, this forming of the clouds that's coming together that I don't understand totally yet. But as I get closer to it, I will. I can't even fit in. I don't know where the two witnesses fit in.
Sure.
I can see the Antichrist. I can start to see the Antichrist fitting in more as a Muslim. You know, if they take back Temple Mount, let's say. If somehow there is some kind of peace where Temple Mount is definitely theirs, well, you could see the Muslim Messiah, the Mahdi is called. You could see him sitting in the seat there. Okay, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as a guesstimate.
Well, I tend to agree with that kind of view on prophecy. You know, it's I tell people you don't want to fill in the details too soon. You know, you've got absolutely what the scripture says, and we can read Zechariah 12 through 14. We see things like, hey, we know it's going to be rough. But I think about what Jesus said to the disciples. I forget where it is in the Gospels, but he says, you know, I'm telling you this now so that when it comes to pass, well, I'm going to probably butcher this, but he's saying basically when it comes to pass, you will know that I was telling the truth or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I think that's how prophecy is going to work out. It's like, okay, we know these prophecies, we know there's these things, and we kind of see through a glass darkly with it. But once it happens, I think it's like, yeah, that's it. I was actually responding to an email to somebody, and they were asking a few things about the tribulation period. And I said this, I just don't think we need to guess at when that's going to be, because when it's
Mhm.
here, you'll really know. I mean, I don't think the tribulation is going to sneak up on us. I
Mhm.
think that when it's here, whether people are pre-trib, post-trib, whatever, um, you're going to know it's here.
Yeah.
It's going to be that clear. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, kind of like to what you said, there's a lot of things we can be looking out for. Um, but it certainly is, like you said, the regathering, that's
Mhm.
already well in process.
Mhm.
You're a part of that regathering.
Mhm.
Your life has been a part of that, like going back to 50 years ago, just like what you were talking about. Uh,
Mhm.
your life's been a part of that. Your family's life has been a part of that, and
Mhm.
um, and there's reasons for that. So, we do see some of those things happening in place, and then, like you said, yet more to come. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I was just kind of curious if you had any particular thoughts on this particular war, because I will be
Mhm.
honest, the one thing that has surprised me is how long this has lasted.
Mhm.
I guess all of my um, experience, if you will, which has been very limited and distant from um, Israeli wars and battles, whether it be conflicts or full-on wars, is they seem to
Mhm.
get resolved somewhat quickly. Um, it doesn't linger, but this one seems to be lingering, and everybody's kind of saying this is not going to end anytime soon. You've got concerns about the northern border, so it does feel different to me
Yeah.
than what
Yep.
I've heard. I'm assuming it feels different to you a little bit,
Mhm.
or maybe a lot of bit, but yeah. So just interested,
Mhm.
if you get any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that the length of the war, and they're talking like it's going to last for months. You know, that the high command, the anyway, the high command, what they were saying in the army before the war. Now, let me say too that there's a really highly regarded Israeli professor of Middle East history who specializes in Islamic history. He speaks fluent Arabic. He was 25 years an IDF intelligence officer, lieutenant colonel. He called this thing. He put out an article last April 11th, and he said, I hesitated to put this article out because of the panic it would cause in the country.
Mm,
So already months before we got into this, we're being warned of he calls it the Iranian Octopus, that it was going to attack us on 5 different fronts and basically strike terror into the hearts of the Israelis,
mm,
go into the kibbutzim, into the villages, take hostages, kill, you know, and strike such terror into the hearts of the Israelis will break their spirit.
mm,
So this is a pre-planned operation,
yes.
and according to him, it's coming from Iran. The hatred toward the Jews in Iran is off the charts.
So this goes back to what you're saying. It's not just like a Hamas thing.
No.
You've got the spiritual
Hmm.
dynamics, and then you've got the political dynamics as
Hmm.
well. And
Hmm.
yeah, the anti-Semitism is
Hmm.
probably greater in the world in no other place than Iran. Maybe there's other places, but it seems to really
Hmm.
stem from there at this point in history. I did
Yeah.
want to kind of close up, Mike, talking a little bit about
Hmm.
anti-Semitism. Um,
Okay.
you and I were talking a little bit earlier this week, and um, about how it's really ramping up. And it's ramping up here. It
Hmm.
was funny. Mike shared a story about a college student at Cornell. And I said, "Yeah,
Hmm.
he lives 15 minutes down the road from me," and he does. That's
Hmm.
where he's from. Although the
Yeah.
Cornell is a couple hours down the road, so that one hit
Hmm.
pretty close to home. But you were sharing some things about anti-Semitism that you were running into, and But
Hmm.
also maybe share like why is it important right now to be standing up? I think for those listening, I know even myself, um,
Hmm.
I tend to try to stay a middle ground on things. I try to say, okay, here's a political issue, and yes, there's a moral right and there's a moral wrong, and I'm going to stand for the one that's morally right. But I pick and choose which ones I'm going to hold a sign for pretty carefully. I don't just hop on these things and become an activist. I just try to teach truth and help people make good decisions. But I'm
Hmm.
even myself feeling a tug that I've got to do something. I don't know what yet. Need to pray about it, talk to some people to really have a voice against anti-Semitism because we had, was it 500,000 people on in London
Hmm.
protesting. We've got all kinds of crazy stuff going on in New York City.
Yeah.
Um, Australia's got some, protests, and they're shouting, gas the Jews.
Hmm.
This is rhetoric that we've not heard. I mean, that I've not heard since I was alive, and that I don't think
Hmm.
we've really heard at this level since the Holocaust, perhaps even. But maybe I'm wrong about that because the Holocaust was kind of hush hush. Even
Hmm.
people didn't want to acknowledge it, and I think we run that same danger. Um,
Hmm.
what are some of the besides the obvious, Mike? I don't want to sound too stupid
Hmm.
on this question, but when anti-Semitism is able to run rampant like this, not just in Iran or within these terrorist organizations, but around the world,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on the danger to Israel, but also to Jews all around the world?
Yeah. That's it's a very concerning thing for any Jew. Our daughter lives in Washington State. So she told me last week she was at a party, and everybody knows that she's Israeli. So she said at the party, some woman came up to her, and she said just started to. She said it was a rage. Look what you Jews are doing to the Palestinian. And she said, I'm not doing anything to the Palestinians. I love the Palestinians. And she said the woman wouldn't stop. So it's a spiritually motivated thing.
Hmm.
And there's some things to balance spiritually in it. Why is it? Well, if I go back to the blessings and the curses that in Deuteronomy 28, you see one of the things in the curses, or a couple of things, is God is gonna He's gonna send us out. We're gonna be chased with the sword wherever we go. That's also Leviticus 25, I think. You're going to be chased by the sword wherever you go, which is the reverse of 28:7, which says, if you get attacked, I will raise up shepherds and they will shepherd the attackers. This is my lousy rendition of this. In seven directions. They'll flee in seven
Hmm.
directions.
Hmm.
So the opposite is you're going to flee. You're going to be chased from city to city. So that's a curse on the Jewish people. It's a curse on the Jewish people because we're not living the way we should, listening and obeying. That in itself is a testimony to the nations. That's part of the witness and the
Hmm.
testimony that the Jewish people are. If we listen and obey, if we are the character of God demonstrated, on the earth, then God is going to protect us by covenant. We have a covenant protection and provision plan with God. If you're like King David, I mean, it's you can be a questionable character, but there's a place with God that relies on character in that you quoted it before, Second Chronicles 7:14. If we humble ourselves, seek God's face, and turn from our wicked ways.
Hmm.
Okay, so what I see in anti-Semitism is a working out of that curse. And there's two videos I'll pass on to you, and you can send them out to your people.
Okay.
One of them is there was an IDF soldier, a woman soldier, that she was held captive in a tunnel under Gaza, and the IDF went in and got her out. Well, you have to see the testimony of her parents. Her parents were praying every day. They brought the Torah scroll from the synagogue into their home, and they're
Wow.
saying, as this Torah scroll is coming into our home, we're believing our daughter Margalite's going to come back. She's going to come into this home. I mean, tremendous, tremendous testimony. There's another one too, but the point is this. If we listen and obey, anti-Semitism will be wiped out. Anti-Semitism, and I'm saying this as Mike, I'm not saying this, from the boss, from the management. If we listen and obey, anti-Semitism will come under the shepherding hand of God. It'll be, but if we don't, what happens is the nature of man gets released on us again as the testimony of those who do wrong.
Mm.
So I see anti-Semitism as this. I see anybody that wants to prove that they're okay, that they're righteous, they can go to the Jews who have been the example to the world to say, see this? This is the source of all of the curse on us. In the banks, in the government, in Hollywood, wherever it is. They'll look at that, they'll look at the Jews as the source. Spiritually motivated because of blessings and curses that we don't see, back again to be in health. If I'm entertaining, the demonic, if I'm bitter all the time, I don't even know that I'm aligning myself with this kingdom. Well, they don't know. I don't think people realize that the reason that they're blaming the Jews is because of this connection, is dark side connection in the spiritual realm. You don't see Christians doing it because we get it.
Well,
Christians,
some
right?
are.
Some, well, not all,
Yeah.
not all. Okay.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
whole other
but
theology there, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, I get that. But you'll see Christians that love Israel.
Hmm.
You'll see this in Muslim background believers. It's incredible. They go from hating Israel to wanting to see all the Jews pushed into the sea to loving Israel. They get it because they get the demonic connection to Islam and the God connection to Israel.
Hmm.
And when I have a God connection to Israel, I understand whoa, these people are far from perfect. Okay, Jeffrey Epstein. But I understand what God is doing with them. I understand that
Right.
they are the witnesses. See, I mean, it's a you can only understand anti-Semitism, in my opinion, if you understand how God is working to, like my book says, to uh, the message of transformation to the world. He's going to take the predator nature out of us. We're going to beat our swords into plowshares, our spears into pruning hooks. We won't learn war anymore. And where is that going to be? In Jerusalem.
Right. Well,
Isaiah chapter 2. Yeah.
that's a great take on anti-Semitism. Actually, you connected some
Mm-hmm.
dots for me that bring it a little
Mm-hmm.
clearer because I like the way you said that. Anti-Semitism, it's going to it's going to come at the Jewish people, whether they're in obedience or disobedience, because again, that's the mind of Satan. Okay, that's the mind of
Mm-hmm.
his kingdom, and as long as there's people that are ruled by that mindset, that's going to come. But I
Mm-hmm.
love how you broke this down to where it's still, though, for the Jewish people, it's how what level it's going to affect them is
Mm-hmm.
dependent on, like you said, the blessings and curses of Deuteronomy 28, and that if they will hearken unto his voice to do all he's commanded to do, there will
Mm-hmm.
come God's protection around that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a great way of thinking about it. Um, obviously, still, I think we have to have a voice, and we have to, um, speak truth. One of the things, Psalm 15, I've been meditating in this psalm is, he that will dwell in tabernacle with the Lord, and he that will dwell in his holy hill is he that speaks truth in his heart. And,
Hmm.
and some of the Jewish people I've been talking to, even some people in the neighborhood, one of the things that they have wondered about is if people are going to stick up for them. I don't know much
Hmm.
about their life or anything like that, but I think it's an opportunity that as believers, whether Jew or Gentile, if you hear somebody kind of saying things that are not true, that don't match truth, that don't match how God thinks about the Jewish people, um, I would encourage you to say something. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
combative, it doesn't have to be mean, but at least give that person something else to think about other than kind of what you were talking about, the traditional conspiracy against the Jews. They're the problem kind of anywhere they
Hmm.
go. Whether they're successful, they're good citizens, but yeah, they become the problem. And
Hmm.
have a voice. And just like anybody that um, doesn't have a voice that needs to be stood up for. The Torah would have us do that, would stand up for those that couldn't stand up for themselves. And
Right.
I just know that, right now the Jewish people are very afraid. But this is
Mm.
where, you know, Jewish people, we need to know our prophets. Because if we knew our
Yes.
prophets,
Hmm.
we would know that, yes, okay, these times of trouble will come, but that Israel will never cease to be a nation before God.
Hmm. Right.
And just going back to the promise that God made with Abraham, he said, I'm going to give
Hmm.
this land to you and your seed forever. So
Yes.
the land, it's a covenant guarantee. Um,
Hmm.
the existence of the Jewish people, eternal. Okay, these are
Hmm.
promises, and these things have to be written definitely on our hearts. So
Mm.
Mike, is there anything you want to say in closing that you want to communicate to those that are listening? I so appreciate your time. We're a little over an hour, but anything else you
Hmm.
want to say or close with before we close out tonight?
Yeah. Let me just read this one scripture in light of anti-Semitism.
Okay, love it.
In light of what I said about the connection to our blessing and curse, depending on if we listen or obey.
Okay.
This is from Nehemiah. This is after the people have been brought back from exile, and it's chapter 10. Chapter 10. Let's start in verse 28. Verse 28 and verse 29. The people are already repenting. They're repenting for their father's sins. But now it says, now the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the Nethinim, and all those who separated themselves from the people of the lands to the law of God, their wives, their sons, their daughters, everyone who had knowledge and understanding. Important. These joined with their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our God, the Lord our Lord, and his ordinances and statutes. Now, why, in my opinion, again, and I just want to again say that everything you're hearing from me is my opinion. I'm not saying that this is absolutely it, but after considering this stuff for years and years, okay, this is the way it comes together for me. So, what is the curse that they're entering into? You can go back to Joshua 24. Joshua 24, he tells the people, he says, we're going to cross over into this land. All these blessings and all these curses are going to come upon you before they ever cross. In process, he says, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
Mm,
Okay? So I know that attached to the covenant that God made with Israel, that there is something I have to consider that's not like any other, again, it's not like any other nation. What I do, how I act, How I relate to God? Why did God choose me to pop a picture up on my windshield and then take me to the place? It's because I'm a Jew,
Mm-hmm.
because I had to go back to the land. It's because I'm chosen even though I don't want to be. I didn't want to be. I had other ideas for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot get away from the blessing and the curse that God has laid out in covenant with my people. Now, I want to say this to everybody that's watching, whether you're an on fire, spirit filled believer, or you're, a Baptist, and we don't want to talk about all that. That's never mind. But whatever your relationship is to God, you've made a covenant with God. What you do may not seem like a big thing at the time, but it will work out. That's the way God is. This planet revolves around the sun 365 days. That's the seasons. We spin on our axis 24 hours. That's the times. God's in charge of all that, and He's in charge of me, and He's in charge of you. And how
Amen to
we listen to Him, that's how the weather's going to be.
that. That's true.
So,
Amen to that.
mhm.
Wow,
Yeah.
a lot to think about. Well,
Hmm.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on and chatting
Yeah.
with
Thanks,
me.
Dave. My pleasure.
There's a whole lot more we could probably get into, but I think you gave a really great insight into the spiritual dynamics behind what's going on and what's been going
Hmm.
on for a long time, and
Hmm.
really appreciate that. It can be daunting. People can get so lost in the news and the
Hmm.
media and the narratives, and thank you for just a very
Hmm.
simple, straightforward take on it. And I know you said it's your opinion, but um,
Hmm.
I really think it's a solid opinion. So I
Oh, that's
appreciate it.
good.
So
Praise God. I
those of you
received
that
it.
are
Hmm.
watching, thanks for joining us again.
Hmm.
Uh, Mike has a book. He alluded to the Isaiah Code, and there should be a link in the description below. You can go to Amazon and
Hmm.
check that out, and love for you to buy some copies of that. So, with that, we're going to be signing off. Thank you. Let's see, had a lot of you over here in the comments. Let's see. Hey, Tina and
Hmm.
Renee and Nate. And D Boys, I got you right this time. I'll always do that. Julie and was it Cher, Michelle, Desiree, Cassie, my wife. Of course, she's watching. Susan, hey y'all. So
Hmm.
thanks for joining us. And Mike, I hope we can have you back on here sometime. Okay.
Be good. Look forward to it, Dave.
All right. Blessings, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay.